There are some science fiction like changes happening in the world of food. Growing meat out of cells is one of them you'll hear about, but far from being quirky science, these developments will affect whether we see widespread starvation and conflict. They'll alter the way we raise children. To explain these changes, we're speaking to food futurist Tony Hunter. Hello, Tony.
Hello, Ashwin. Great to be on the show.
Good to have you back. Now, you always have quite interesting things to say about some of the bizarre sounding developments in science. What's happening in the world of cell-based meat?
Well, look, as you said before, Ashwin, so much has changed in the last 12 months, but things like cultivated meat have just powered on despite any of the other changes. And just for the listeners who aren't maybe familiar with cell-based meat or cultivated meat, what you basically do is take some cells from an animal. It can be from a biopsy, or we've got one company taking it from the end of a chicken feather, and then you grow that in great big fermentation vessels. So you're basically growing meat without the animal.
Is that quite common now? Has this been launched anywhere?
Look, there has been enormous interest in this, and over the last 5 years, we've seen this go from science fiction idea to now being science fact. And one of the most significant events, Ashwin, happened only last month. Where were you at 9 p.m. on December the 19th, 2020?
Probably prepping a summer show. I'm not sure exactly what was significant about that day.
Well, on that day, that's one of those days, almost like man landing on the moon, where you say, where was I on that day? Because that was the day that we had the first commercial sale approved by a food safety body of this cultivated meat in the world in Singapore. And that was by a company called Eat Just. And they served chicken nuggets, and they served them to teachers and a bunch of kids in their early teens who could taste this product and literally taste what the future could be like.
What was the feedback? Does it taste just like meat?
That's the old one. Gee, that tastes just like chicken.
It does. I like, because people are quite reticent sometimes about new foods, aren't they? Like eating insects and things. But do you think cell-based meat will have that stigma around it?
Look, I think it's one of those things. It's what you're used to, what you become accustomed to. Why do we eat chickens and have dogs as pets and not the other way around? It's what we're used to and what's come over hundreds and thousands of years of our culture. And I think if people look at it that way and look at some of the other issues that we've got, which we'll maybe talk about just in a few minutes' time, they'll see that there is a real reason that we should be embracing and adopting these technologies.
Yeah, Sorry, you go.
I say it's basically coming to be science fact. And so we're going to have companies in the cellular aquaculture going to be selling fish products this year. They'll be able to buy them in restaurants, probably in the US. We're going to see products in Japan. We have our own company over here called Vow Foods, who's developing kangaroo and water buffalo.
What is the social significance of this technology?
Look, socially, we have to look at what our impact is on the planet. And a lot of these new technologies help us with things like our GHG emissions, CO2 emissions and so on, and also our ability to be able to feed all the new people that are coming onto the planet in the next 20, 30 years. And that's animal agriculture has a really great effect on the resources of the planet and how we all manage to exist. And that's another one that's really come up, that's really, really cutting edge, this one. There's a company called Turtle Tree Labs in Singapore, another one called Biomilk in the US. They can grow cells, mammary gland cells that will produce milk from any species, including human.
How does this work? Can you tell me how human milk gets made in a lab?
Yeah, well, it's a very, very similar process to what we talked about cell-based meats. They take the cells, the stem cells from a particular animal, and that animal could be human, and then you grow that in a specially manufactured bioreactor, and it produces virtually all of the components, the nutritional components of human milk, not some of the things like the immunoglobulins, the antibodies and so on in human milk, but the nutritional profile of milk. And that means that we can do that using a fraction of the land and water resources in particular that's needed to produce it via traditional dairy methods. And whilst we do drink dairy milk, in the end, dairy milk was made for calves. It wasn't made for human children. It's a pretty good substitute in many ways, but if we could actually use proper, true human milk adapted for human babies, then that would be a real bonus for us.
They say many of the wars of the future may be fought over water and arable land. Do you tie this into those pressures? Maybe this can be a way to reduce the chance of conflict.
Look, I think you're absolutely right, Ashwin. I mean, if you go back 50 years ago, 1970, it's a long time for a lot of people. Maybe a lot of our listeners may not even been born then. But there was only 3.7 billion people on the planet. We're now up to more than double that, 7.8. We're going to hit 10 billion by 2050, which means we're going to need 70% more food than we currently make due to population and people getting more affluent and more middle class. And as we know, to grow food, you need arable land and fresh water. And there's not enough arable land or fresh water on the planet for the whole world in 2040 or 2050 to eat the way we do in Australia today and the way that you and I and the majority of people listening to this show will eat today. It cannot be done if we simply try and duplicate the current food system. It's simply not going to happen.
Are there parts of the world that are going to be more affected by that pressure than others?
Absolutely. Think about places like Singapore. They import 90% of their food. A lot of the Middle Eastern countries import 90% of their food. Oman ensures its food security by having 12 months worth of food for its population in warehouses. 12 months.
Yes.
So that's their only way of getting their food security, because those twin tyrannies, as I call them, of arable land and fresh water, if you have it, you can grow food. If you don't, you're at the mercy of those countries that do. And we've seen under COVID where countries in Europe simply stopped exporting for a short period of time. Luckily, it didn't have a major effect, but they just said, no exports of wheat, no exports of sugar, until we see what goes on in our own country. And in a way, you can understand that, but countries without the ability to make their own food, they're going like, wow, are we going to be able to import enough food to feed our population? So these new technologies don't require, many of them don't require arable land, and they require very small amounts of fresh water. So therefore we remove those twin tyrannies and people can get better, if not total, but at least much better food security. And as you said, Ashwin, they're saying a lot of the next wars will be fought over water, not over land.
When are we like to see this technology in Australia?
Well, I say we've got the guys at Vow Food who just got $7.7 million worth of VC funding this week. I think we'll see that over here. We're probably going to be, as usual, 2 to 3 years behind the US. But the really great thing over here, and this is, I think, unique as far as I know in the world, is we've got something called the Future of Protein Forum, which is the National Farmers Federation, the New South Wales Farmers Federation, and a company called Food Frontier getting together to look at the future of protein. Because these technologies, if we don't do them, somebody else will. If Saudi Arabia wants to spend $200 billion turning itself into a beef mince producer, they can. Then what are we going to do? So we need to look at the future of protein and what consumers want and what these technologies are doing, because we're going to need conventional animal agriculture and these new technologies for many decades if we're going to feed this growing population of the world.
And it sounds like we are going to have to become much more of a science-focused nation to take advantage of this.
Absolutely. I mean, we call ourselves the smart country, but to do that, we really do have to get into these new technologies, because I like to say now, food is now technology. If you think of food and food technology like your mobile phone, your smartphone, how has that improved exponentially over the last decade or more in terms of its features and its power? I mean, it's the old one, we've got more computing power in our pocket than sent man to the moon. Well, we passed that a couple of decades ago. So if you think of food that way, What took 10 years will take 5 years. What took 15 years will take 3 years. We're in exponential growth, and so many of these things are now going from science fiction to science fact, and we're going to see that happen more and more in the coming years, Ashwin.
The most radical one you've mentioned this morning has been the human milk. One element you
Yeah.
spoke about earlier is that it can be personalised medically. Can you explain that?
Well, that's right. One of the big things that people want is personalisation. Think about your Netflix feed. You watch this, you might like that. Your Spotify playlist, recommended songs. People want personalisation, and they're realising that everybody is different. I mean, you and I can both eat a piece of chocolate. Your blood glucose does nothing. Mine goes through the roof. Lucky you. But that's how individual our responses are. So people want it personalised. So if you could then personalise that human milk to your particular baby, to your child, that would release you from having to be there all the time in order to feed that child a good and nutritious diet in the first 6 months of life, because that's the recommendation, breastfeeding for the first 6 months. Most children, particularly industrialised countries, that doesn't happen.
It sounds like human milk might be the one you'll get the most pushback on because of the maternal relationship. Do you think food scientists are going to have to team up with communicators to really push the safety and necessity of some of these technologies?
I think you're absolutely right, Ashwin. It's like we talked about before. It's that familiarity, what's culturally familiar. I mean, if you think about the human milk side of things, wet nurses, which many people probably have never even heard of, were hired to feed babies from other parents because the parents either couldn't breastfeed or didn't want to for whatever reason. So there's a long history of using human milk from women other than the biological parent in feeding their children. But people need to become familiar, and when they see the advantages too of saying, well, yeah, I can go on that business trip. Okay, I don't have enough milk. I can buy in what I need, and I can continue to give the best nutrition to my children and look at the advantages that way. Then I think that one, whilst it blows most people's minds, when you start really thinking it through, and as you say, people are assured that it's safe, it's healthy, and socially acceptable, then I think that's got a really good future, because it's going to revolutionise the infant formula market too.
Where can people buy these products in Australia? Where will they be able to if you want to keep on top of these trends?
You see, most of these products at the moment, they are cutting edge. Like we said, the cell-based meat's only just gone on sale in Singapore. Legislatively, we still need to get the approval from FSANZ, the food safety body in Australia, to say that these products are actually okay to be sold. And when you do see a product like this, a novel product in the market, it has undergone really, really thorough investigation to prove that it is safe for human consumption. So if you see these products on the market, they have been thoroughly investigated and proven to be safe.
Tony Hunter, just before we wrap up, is there a last message you'd like to leave to listeners about food science and what to expect?
Look, I think we are living in the most exciting time to be in the food industry and food science that I've seen in 30 odd years in the food industry. And if we keep an open mind about these new technologies, and we realise that the current food system can't do what it needs to do to feed the world. And so we're going to need these new technologies, and we're going to need to keep that open mind if we're going to look after both ourselves and the rest of the planet.
Food futurist Tony Hunter, thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks, Ashwin. Take care. Bye.